Our client bought this site for $320,000. He's actually spending £275,000 on this. It's got an NGDV of $930,000, and the rental for this, once complete, will be $85,900. Watch this video. We're going to show you how we did it. Now, if you're new to the channel, my name is Malkit Purewal, one half of Savoys Properties. We've been in the property industry for the past 23 years, developing from HMOs, commercial residential, ground up. Primarily, we've been specializing in commercial residential and HMOs for one particular reason, and that is it actually makes sense and you can recycle your cash. Well, let me show you how we achieve these numbers. This is actually done by combining two strategies together, and these are two strategies that we've been using for over a decade. One, commercial or residential conversion, and the other is residential to HMO. So if you're not familiar with what commercial to residential is, commercial to residential is a permitted development right which you can obtain using prior approval. Basically, back in 2013, the government knew there was a massive shortage of homes and wanted a way to actually simplify the planning process. This was the actual prior approval. The government initially allowed this right for commercial offices to be converted to residential use. This has been a massive success across the country, so the government has rolled this out to all properties that fall under Class E, and obviously there are some exemptions with listed buildings and areas of outstanding natural beauty, and potentially there could be some Article 4 directives in place, but stay tuned because this could be all changing in the upcoming months. So commercial residential with this site is basically taking a Class E property on the ground floor and being able to repurpose this to two residential flats. Now with the HMO part, this is basically another permitted development right which allows investors and developers to actually repurpose properties which are Class C3 and repurpose them to HMOs which is Class C4. This is PD, so you don't actually need planning permission to actually make those changes internally. If you're going to be making some external changes, you could do these under permitted development, and in this case obviously this is a commercial property, so we had to apply for planning permission to change the upper parts to dormers. The uppers of this commercial building used to be a 2.5 bedroom flat. We're using permitted development and full planning to actually change the uppers to 5 ensuite rooms, which will then let from anywhere in the region of £750 per calendar month all the way up to £950 per calendar month for the biggest room. So previously this property would have been generating two sources of income, one for the commercial unit downstairs which would have been £1,000 per calendar month, and the uppers was rented for £1,000 per calendar month, which basically equates to £24,000 per annum. Now with the reconfiguration, we're going to end up keeping a small proportion of retail space, around about 24-25 square meters. We're going to end up having 2 studio flats and 5 ensuite rooms. In total, this will actually generate £85,900 per annum, and obviously that's a significant uplift on the £24,000 this property was previously generating. We're in the ground floor of this former defunct commercial space. Now, one of the bigger questions is how do we acquire this site? So we're actually working on the site next door when the freeholder of this building said, well, do you know, would you like to actually purchase this? Now, there's a reason for this. A lot of these secondary parades are now not in favor, and in some areas are completely dead. So they've become, unfortunately, defunct, and they're actually crying out to be repurposed. The freeholder was actually happy for us to wait to finish the site next door and agreed that we could actually purchase this subject to planning. Now, subject to planning means we basically exchange on a contract, but there's no obligation on our behalf to actually complete until the planning has actually been approved. Now, the planning actually required 2 dormers to the rear of the roof at the back. In addition, we had 2 prior approval applications, one to convert the ground floor to residential use, and then we had prior approval application for the outbuilding, which will show you, which will also be reconfiguring to a studio flat. Going down the subject to planning route basically allowed us to minimize the risk that we had. So the only risk that we had was the legal fees that we had to pay, and apart from that, that was actually minimized. The lenders actually like to see that you have planning approved. It allows them to have a little bit more certainty, and in some cases you can actually obtain better rate from your broker. An important aspect to always bear in mind when you're viewing a commercial building is checking whether you have single phase or three phase. Now, if you don't know what that is, just have a look over here. Now, single phase is basically a single supply electricity that comes in. This typically is for smaller commercial units and residential units that have this. Three phase, and there's a photo of this just here. This is basically a bigger supply that comes in, basically can handle more wattage, and the great news is three phase can actually be split into multiple supplies. This will actually save you money when you come down to your renovation, as you don't need to dig up the road to get new connections in. It's simply a case of getting in contact with your supplier and asking for some additional meters to be installed. When you're actually looking around the commercial property, always check whether you have a gas supply. And if you have a gas supply and you're converting elements of the property to residential, ensure you use that gas supply in the biggest part of that property. So in our case, we're actually going to be using the gas supply for the HMO element, as this is actually going to be the part which uses the most energy consumption. Therefore, it makes sense to actually use gas within this bit, as gas per kilowatt is a lot lower than electric per kilowatt. With the studio flats, they're actually going to be run on electric, as they actually require less kilowatts to actually run compared to the other parts of our business. So ensure you look out whether you have a gas supply there, and then you have to make an educated decision on whether you're going to run new gas supplies in for the other smaller residential units, or you stick with electric. Under prior approval, we're actually able to repurpose this building here. So this part of the building used to be auxiliary use to the commercial property. The guys are in here, we're actually cleaning this out, putting some insulation in. This is actually going to be repurposed to a studio flat. So if you can actually prove that this building has been used as auxiliary use to the commercial unit, actually benefits from these prior approval rights that you can actually take advantage for. Now, we'll show you a few of the projects that we've actually done here before using the same rights. One is basically the Muse House project. You'll be able to see one of the videos on our YouTube channel on how we'd actually transform such an ugly building into something so nice. Now, will our client sell or retain? Well, with the numbers which I mentioned at the start of the video, he's obviously going to retain. He's able to recycle his cash and then have a property that's going to be generating him a good passive income. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, check out our free webinar where you can actually learn on how you can actually implement these prior approval and permitted development changes yourself and get started on your property journey.